Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to pull back the curtain on a dynasty that is, powerful but often kind of overlooked. A dynasty that shaped the very heart of India for more than 400 years. They rose from the ashes of one massive empire to build another, and they left behind a legacy that was carved in stone, written down in scripture, and woven into the very fabric of a society that would go on to influence the subcontinent for 1,000 years. All right, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to figure out who exactly these Satavahanas were and how they came to power. Then, we'll get to know the kings and queens who really defined the dynasty, and we'll see how their coins tell this hidden story of trade and conquest. After that, we'll dive into the puzzle of their society, take a look at their pretty unique style of government, and then finally, we'll explore the absolutely breathtaking art and architecture they left behind. And this is really the big question that sets the whole scene, right? The Mauryan Empire was this colossal power. It united huge parts of India. So when it started to crumble, it left this massive void. And, history tells us that power vacuums, they just don't last long. And down in the Deccan Plateau, a new force was getting ready to rise. But they weren't just going to be a sequel to the Mauryans. Nope, they were about to write a totally new chapter for the entire region. Okay, so let's set the stage for our main characters to emerge. The Satavahanas, they show up on the historical scene right around the 1st century BC. And what's important is that they weren't invaders from some far-off land. They were a native power, rising right from the soil of the Deccan. As the Mauryan grip on power started to fade, the Satavahanas stepped up to become the new masters of their own destiny. So first off, let's just get a sense of the scale here. Ancient texts, the Puranas, they talk about a people called the Andhras, and it's pretty widely believed that these were the Satavahanas. And just look at this territory they controlled. This wasn't some small local kingdom. Their domains stretched across what are now 4 major Indian states. They set up their capital at Pratistana in Maharashtra, and they cemented their power by taking out the Kanva dynasty. That was a clear signal that a new power had arrived. Okay, so an empire is really defined by its leaders and, of course, its economy. So let's move on and see how the Satavahana rulers stamped their authority on the subcontinent. And they didn't just do it with armies, but with some clever administration and a really distinctive way of handling their money. This timeline here kind of gives us the highlight reel of their leadership. It all kicks off with the founder, Simuka, but the name that really truly shines is Gautamiputra Satakarni. This guy represents the absolute peak of Satavahana military power. He's followed by his son, Vashishthiputra Pulamavi, who was more focused on locking down those gains and officially setting up the capital. And then later on, you get Yagnashri Satakarni, who's this fascinating ruler. Not only did he fight to get territory back, but he clearly understood that the empire's real strength was in its booming trade. And this just brilliantly sums up the might of their greatest king, Gautamiputra Satakarni. This isn't just a boast from some court poet, okay? This is an inscription commissioned by his own mother, Gautami Balashri. It was carved into the caves at Nashik for everyone to see. It celebrates his wins over these really tough foreign rivals, the Shakas, the Pallavas, the Yavanas, and calls him the Lord of Vindhya, which is the mountain range separating northern and southern India. He wasn't just a king. He was seen as a unifier, a protector, and his mother made sure that history would never, ever forget it. Their coins are incredible. They're like these tiny little historical documents. First, just look at the materials they used. They liked base metals like lead and copper and this special alloy called potin. And it's fascinating that they didn't make their own gold coins. It kind of suggests they saw gold as just a raw store of wealth, not something for everyday use. But here's the real power move, restriking coins. When Gautamiputra Satakarni beat the Shaka ruler Nahapana, he took Nahapana's coins and stamped his own symbol right over them. Talk about a public declaration of I won. And later, that ship design on Yagnashri Satakarni's coins, that's undeniable proof of a huge maritime trade network. And just so we're all on the same page about what we're talking about, here's potin. It's not a precious metal, it's an alloy. The fact that the Satavahanas used it so much for their coins really shows how unique their metalworking was and how self-sufficient they were. They didn't need to play by the gold or silver rules of other empires, they just made their own. Okay, so we've talked about the rulers. Let's switch gears and talk about the ruled. Who were the people living in the Satavahana Empire? Well, as we're about to see, their society was this fascinating, complex mix of local traditions, adopted social structures, and some really unusual customs that kind of challenge our simple ideas about ancient India. Now, this right here is a super important dynamic to get. The Satavahanas at their roots were a tribe from the Deccan, but as they got more powerful, they needed a more legitimate way to rule. And they did this by becoming Brahmanized, by adopting and promoting the orthodox social structure of the time. This was an absolutely brilliant strategic move. It totally changed their image from just being tribal conquerors to being righteous kings, the upholders of social order and dharma. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Just look at the names of their kings. Gautamiputra, the son of Gautami. Vashishthiputra, the son of Vashishti. They took their names from their mothers. This is a clear matrilineal custom, honoring the mother's family line. We even see queens like Gautami Balashri putting out their own inscriptions, which shows that royal women had some serious prestige. And here's the puzzle. The actual line of succession for the throne, strictly patriarchal. It went from father to son. So what's going on here? Why does this matter? It points to this unique, hybrid social structure, blending different traditions. It suggests that while the male line determined who held power, the female line determined identity and status in a way we just don't see very often in ancient kingdoms. All right, so building an empire? That's one thing. But keeping it going for over 4 centuries? That is a whole other ballgame. That takes some serious administrative genius. So let's take a look at the machinery of the Satavahana state and how they managed to control such a huge and diverse territory for so long. The Satavahanas were pragmatic. They were smart. They didn't reinvent the wheel. They kept some of the administrative setups from the Mauryan era, like officials called amachas, but they added their own distinct flavor, and that flavor was heavily militaristic. Notice how their military camps also worked as administrative centers, and how the guy in charge of rural areas was a golmika, the head of a military unit. What this tells us is that for the Satavahanas, there was no clear line between governing and commanding an army. Their entire state was basically a well-oiled military machine. So how did they manage this huge kingdom? Well, they didn't try to micromanage everything. Instead, they set up this really clever 3-tiered system of feudatories. Basically, local rulers who were loyal to the central power. At the very top, you had the Raja, a subordinate king who was so powerful he could even mint his own coins. Below him were the Mahabhoja and then the Senapati. This decentralized model was the absolute key to their long-term success. It let them project power across a vast empire, not by controlling every single village, but by managing this network of loyal local lords. 0. What in the world could this number represent? Nothing. Nada. This represents the amount of tax that was charged on certain pieces of land. But which pieces of land and why? This single number signals one of the most significant, one of the most lasting innovations of Satavahana rule. Okay, here it is. This is the big one. The Satavahanas were the first rulers in India to start granting tax-free land to Brahmanas and Buddhist monks. Now, this was way more than just a tax break. It was a fundamental shift in the whole idea of power in India. By creating a class of landowners who held authority but didn't actually work the land themselves, they essentially invented the blueprint for the feudal system that would dominate the subcontinent for the next 1,000 years. A real game changer. An empire's power, it eventually fades. But the things it builds, that can last for millennia. So finally, let's turn to the most visible and enduring legacy of the Satavahanas, their incredible contributions to art, architecture, and literature. A legacy that is literally carved in stone and written in ancient script. The Satavahanas were incredible builders and patrons of religion, but they didn't just build temples, they excavated them. In the hills of the Western Deccan, they carved these vast prayer halls, or chechas, and monasteries, or viras, directly from the living rock. The checha at Karli is just one of the most magnificent examples. But what's really cool is their patronage wasn't just for one faith. While the kings themselves performed Vedic sacrifices, they also poured money into the flourishing of Buddhism, contributing massively to the great stupas at Amaravati and Sanchi. And here's a little secret, something that shows just how incredibly advanced they were. When we look at these caves, we see art, but we should also be seeing amazing engineering. The Nasik caves, for example, have this secret hidden in plain sight. Carved right into the rock are these water cisterns with integrated filtration channels. They designed graded sluices and traps to catch sediment and purify rainwater, giving the monks a clean, reliable water source. This wasn't just architecture, it was sophisticated hydrological engineering, a testament to their practical genius. And check this out, they weren't just warriors and builders, they had a serious cultural side. Crucially, their official court language was Prakrit. Now, by choosing this more common language over the elite formal Sanskrit, they made literature way more accessible and created this truly vibrant cultural scene. One of their own kings, King Hala, was a celebrated poet himself. He wrote the Gahasatsai, which is a collection of 700 love poems. And under their watch, Gunadaya wrote the Brihat Katha, this massive collection of stories that became a source for countless later works.
So there you have it, the Satavahanas. They were so much more than just a dynasty that filled a gap between empires. They were pioneers. Their unique social structure, their militaristic government, their amazing art, and maybe most importantly, their revolutionary policy of land grants, all of it had consequences that echoed long after their empire was gone. So the big takeaway here is that the decisions made by these Deccan kings may very well have set the stage for the next 1,000 years of Indian social and economic history, and that makes them one of the most quietly influential dynasties the subcontinent has ever seen.